Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Betty, let's dance, Oliver called out to the girl. There was dancing in the village tonight. No, she looked at everyone who was here and was very surprised at how everything was going on in the village. What are you? So unsociable. He was wooing her. Normal, unlike you. She looked around at the people who were here. Oh, here we go, city bimbos. The young man snorted and stepped away from her. It was a hot summer, but Betty disliked this time of year so much. Every time she and her parents came here to help her grandmother dig the vegetable garden, plant potatoes and other crops. She was born into an ordinary family. They lived in the city, but not so long ago her parents came here from the village. Father and mother worked at the factory. At first they, like many workers of this institution, lived in the dormitory which was provided to them. But after a few years, when Betty started first grade, they got their own place. So are we going? Dad asked on a hot June afternoon. Again, Betty grimaced. She did not understand how to live in the village. There is a private house, animals constantly unpleasant smell, and even a toilet outside. You what? We were born there with mother, all roots there. Did not understand her reluctance, father. Can I stay here somehow? Asked the girl. At that time she was only 10 years old, and of course her parents could not leave her alone. What do you think you're doing? The man was getting angry. They got into the car, and as every time drove down the route familiar to everyone. Betty sat in the back seat. She folded her arms across her chest, frowning. Daughter, look out the window, how beautiful it is, her mother told her. I don't see anything beautiful, Betty muttered to herself under her nose, but she still squinted. All around, the forest was replaced by a field, and in the distance, at the horizon, there was something unusual. The rich colors of summer were very eye-catching, but the girl was not interested. And so today she was here again at her grandmother's house. When she came here as a child, she liked to run barefoot on the grass, splashing in the old tin bathtub, which then still alive grandfather put out on the street and poured water into it. Neighborhood girls and boys would run around the fence, calling her to come with them, and she would run with them. Right now, though, she didn't want to hang out with anyone. Betty couldn't wait until they were back in town again and their normal, ordinary life began. Look at the goose grandmother cooked. Her mother tried to entice her. I don't want any goose, the daughter turned away, showing that this life was not for her. In the evening they went to bed, and in the morning when the rooster sang, the grandmother woke everyone up. Before the heat rises, we must work, the woman said. Do I have to go too? Betty raised her head. And how did you want? You like to eat cucumbers, tomatoes in winter, and you think where they come from, smiled Grandma. Well, she got up, and as she was in her nightgown, so she went out into the garden. She did it deliberately. She knew that the mistress would not approve of it and would chase her away. That's all Betty wants. She'll go back to the house and sleep again. What's the matter with you? Grandmother would grumble at once. It's so hot outside. What difference does it make what you work in? Looked her granddaughter at her. Either go change or, the woman did not finish. Betty did not need to persuade. She put the puller to the fence and headed towards the house. When she entered the cool room, she plopped down on the bed. That was all her work for the day. The grandmother reproached her daughter and son-in-law. Nothing, she is still young. She will grow up and realize that all this is not for nothing. The father stood up for his daughter. When all the work was done, the family returned to town. Betty was glad of that. Here the first thing she did was to go to the bathroom, draw some water, and lie down in it. The girl from childhood wanted to be different from her village acquaintances. She sat down in front of the mirror, put her hair in a tight bundle. She would put on some strict dress, arrange her toys in front of her, and begin to instruct them. Betty imagined herself as some kind of boss. Now she was 15 and they were back in the village. Today, she had decided to show these uncouth rednecks what a girl should look like. The local girls came to the dance in colorful dresses, with braids like cowlicks on their heads. Betty, on the other hand, walked down the village road with her head held up proudly. On her feet she wore lacquered loafers with a small heel, neat white socks with ruffles. A strict suit that her mother had made her out of her own. a narrow skirt, blouse, and jacket. The girl herself thought she looked 100%. Everyone was already on the dance floor when she got up there. That's when Oliver noticed her and came up. Wow, the guy whistled. He was determined to get the girl by all means. And then he asked her to dance, but she ignored him. Why are you like this? He couldn't understand when he approached her again. You don't need to come near me. She shunned him like the plague, as if she was afraid of getting infected. Selena, look what this bimbo wants here. She's all dressed up. All the guys are looking at her, Katie said to her friend. I see they were standing and looking in the direction where Betty was standing. Selena was an authority in the village. Lots of girls asked her for advice. Guys were friends with her. No one ever dared to say anything bad to the girl. And then this city girl shows up and starts making eyes at her. Selena couldn't let that go. When Betty realized that the last dance was over, she decided it was time for her to go home. She was already downstairs and heading towards her house when she was blocked by a crowd of girls. What do you want? Betty stopped. What do you want here? Selena asked right away. Just came to visit my grandmother to help her. The girl was telling the truth. Yeah, did she come to see her grandmother or to get our guys off her back? Said Katie. What are you talking about? She was trying to keep up appearances. I'll show you. Selena came at her. Betty felt her skirt go up at the seams. She had never been in a fight, so now she was just covering herself with her hands. That's it. She's had enough. Stop everyone. Katie stopped everyone. Betty was lying on the ground. Her clothes were torn and dusty. Her hair was disheveled and now sticking out in different directions. She got up and walked toward the house. Her knees were sore and she felt that they were broken. What happened? She saw her mother walking towards her. Nothing. She tried to walk faster to her room to change. Her mother and father looked at each other. They themselves knew that in the village the locals were not to be trifled with. But no one had expected their daughter to get into such a situation. Mom, I want to get out of here, screamed the next day Betty. A couple more days and we'll be in town, she promised her. I don't want to wait any more days, the girl cried. But you'll have to, her father told her. These days Betty decided to spend at home, so she wouldn't run into any more of these chanthros. So she did. Watched what her parents and grandmother were doing in the vegetable garden. She could just go out in the yard and sit and enjoy the fresh air. Betty, go to the store, her grandmother asked her. I don't want to. In fact, she was afraid to go outside. Yes, let it go, she admitted. She was weak and couldn't answer to these girls. But Betty didn't want to be strong because she wanted something else out of life. And you don't want to. Grandma looked at her sternly. All right, took Betty the bag, money, and went out the gate. Hello, Oliver was waiting outside the gate, scaring her. What are you doing here? Betty was shaking inside. Let's go for a ride. He turned around and there was a moped by the fence. I'm not going anywhere with you. Betty turned around and wanted to go, but she saw the girls coming from the other side of the store. So, what's up? He held her hand. What the girl wanted most of all now was to go back inside the gate, to be home again. But she couldn't break free. Okay, let's go. At that moment, Betty didn't even think of anything bad the young man could do to her. He got on the moped. Betty got in the back. They rattled past the girls with just anger on her face. The girl thought he would take her to the end of the village and there they would stop. But Oliver didn't think about that. He turned onto a path that led to the forest. Well, look, first you have to look closely at the fungus, Oliver saw. Where Betty is looking, he stood up, took out a knife and cut the mushroom. Show me, now it's getting interesting for some reason. It's a good mushroom, he showed her. And the bad one. She couldn't wait to hear the story of the greaves. Look, almost all greaves have a skirt under the cap, and also towards the end of the stem is a little thickened. If you turn the fungus over, you'll see that there are thin plates at the bottom of the cap. This is common with greaves. You can also cut off the stem, continued to tell the young man. Already more interesting, the girl began to smile. Yeah, I read a book on how to survive in the forest if you get lost. You can eat herbs, roots, berries, but you just need to know what you can eat and what not. There are also mushrooms that can be eaten raw. To gather water, you can carefully collect dew. If you're lucky and there's a fire, you can sleep not on the ground, but to make an interesting construction. He looked to see if Betty was listening to him or not. Well, what kind of construction is it? She was interested. You make a fire, and when it burns out, you gather thick boards or branches, and then lay them on stones or on each other so that you get a well over the coals. Lie down, warm and dry, Oliver said. Have you ever tried it yourself? Betty wondered. No, only read, he sighed. I see. Only the girl began to wonder how the guy disappointed her. Well, are you bored? He moved closer to her. I thought you were telling me things you tried yourself, and so she waved her hand, stood up, and went to pick some flowers. Oliver drove Betty home again today, and they agreed to meet again. The girl entered the house. Her family looked at her, smiling. Today she was not with knockers, but with flowers. Well, did you find a suitor? Mom asked. No, it's just like that. The girl was sure of it. Yeah, look, as if you don't have to stay here. Mom shook her head. What are you talking about? The girl was even scared. Just kidding, we'll go home soon, her mother told her. Hurry up, Betty told her. Even though she liked hanging out with Oliver, it still wasn't what she was used to. They were in town in a couple of days, just as her parents had promised. At first, Betty was excited about it, but when school was a week away, she started to miss it. She herself didn't know why she wasn't having so much fun. And anyway, if anything, why would one be bored? But thinking about Oliver made her sad. So ready for the new school year? Her father sat down next to her. Of course she was. She looked up at him and smiled. She couldn't wait for it all to start, to break the boredom. Hey, how was your summer? Her friend Tanya asked Betty. Normal, answered her girl. Were you in the village again? Her friend guessed. Yeah, the girl nodded her head. Will you at least tell me how it is there and what? Tatiana asked repeatedly. What to tell you? If you were there, you would see that there live inadequate people. Betty did not really want to tell her friend that this summer she had happened there, that she'd met a guy, even though she'd known him before, and that now she was really bored without him, without this stupid, she thought, stories. So, what's the matter with you hanging up your nose again? Betty came home and her mother saw how sad she was. You're imagining things, the girl said. So tell me, do you miss Oliver? A woman sat down with her. How did you know? The daughter looked at her mother. How could you not guess? You think I wasn't in love? Her mother told her. And when after 2 weeks Betty came home from school, her mother met her in the hallway. Well, darling, dance, she waved the letter. Who was it from? The girl wondered. And you guess? Mother smiled enigmatically and closed her eyes. Did Oliver really write it? The girl could not believe that it could be. Will you dance? Her mother asked her again. Come on. She twirled her legs a little on the spot. Here, her mother gave it to her, and Betty immediately ran to her room. She printed out the letter. It was really from Oliver. What he had written to her. The young people were practically 16 years old, and Oliver had told her how beautiful and interesting she was, and how much fun he had with her, and all the rest. Betty read the letter and her face burned. She imagined if the guy had said it out loud into her eyes, she probably wouldn't have been able to stand it and would have laughed or just run away. Then they had dinner in the kitchen. The mother looked back and forth at her father and daughter. Ariana, why are you so mysterious today? Her husband asked her. Did you know that our daughter received a letter today? The mother asked her husband a question. Yes, from whom? The father turned to Betty. Mom looked at her daughter. Come on, Mom, it's so beautiful, first relationship. It's all good, she told her. Still, Betty lowered her eyes. What are you going to write him back? The parents were interested in everything to do with their daughter. I haven't decided yet. The girl finished her dinner and went to her room. She didn't know what to do now. What if Oliver, along with his friends, got together and he wrote her a letter to make fun of her? Or the girls had written on Oliver's behalf. She just didn't know what to think. But when a week had passed, she made up her mind, sat down, and wrote to him. In her letter, Betty told him how she'd spent the rest of the summer, how she'd gone to school, and how boring the place was. When she had been in the village and thought it was bad there, she had been very wrong about that. A week later, she got a letter from Oliver again. And now, without thinking, she went to the post office and mailed her letter. So the two young people began to correspond. There was nothing much to write, so they mostly described the nature, how it was now on the street, studies, and everything else. Well, Did I see that you corresponded? The mother asked her daughter. Yes, she didn't lie. And what does he write? The woman was interested. Invites me to New Year's Eve to celebrate together, said quietly Betty. So, of course, go, and grandmother from us congratulate, and yourself meet a friend. The mother even wanted it. Okay, I've already thought about it, and I know I'll go, said Betty. Now the mother and father saw that their daughter had grown up. She was already thinking about boys, and they were texting. And when the New Year's vacation came, the father took the girl to her grandmother in the village. Hi, Grandma. She came in to see her. Oh, granddaughter, why didn't you warn me? I wasn't expecting, she replied. And how would we have warned you? By carrier pigeon? Her son asked her. Yes, well, come in. Always glad to children and grandchildren, smiled grandmother. So I, just to drink tea, and went back, said the man. And you? Grandma looked at her granddaughter. And I'll stay for the New Year's vacation, Betty smiled. Okay, the grandmother went, put the kettle on. She set something on the table, and when the tea was finished, the father left the house, got in the car, and drove back. Well, tell me, squinted and looked at her granddaughter. What is there to tell? Betty didn't understand. How was that what? Every summer when you came to me, you all moaned, saying that you do not like it here, and now, all of a sudden, you came yourself, and for the whole vacation. The woman shook her head. Well, grandmother did not want her granddaughter to molest her. What do you mean, grandmother? She said and sat down on a chair. Yes, we correspond with Oliver. As summer began to communicate, I realized that I am interested in this guy. He texted me first, and I texted him back, and that's how it started. Now he invited me to New Year's Eve to celebrate it together, said Betty. Well, wow, my granddaughter has grown up, rejoiced grandmother. On December 31st, the woman set the table. They sat for a while. Oliver came to take her home, but no one would let them go. You first sit here, congratulate me, and I'll congratulate you, and then you can go. At midnight, their grandmother told them, all right, we'll sit here for sure. The young people didn't want to offend her. And indeed, they sat at the table for a couple of hours. Oliver was telling stories again, all about nature, about animals, about how he practiced with them at home. You can't imagine, my mother bought 4 rabbits, and that was in the summer, and now we have an incredible number of them. Oliver laughed and told the story. Hey, threatened grandmother with her finger. And when all the presents were given, congratulations were said, and at 12:30, the young people went to Oliver's parents. They too were glad to meet the girl. They sat at the table for a while. The parents of the guy even offered to taste champagne, but Betty blushed and refused. She was very embarrassed in front of the adults. And then the young man went to walk her home. They stood near her gate for a long time. Go on, come on, it's getting very late, Betty told him. See you tomorrow. He came up and kissed her on the cheek. Oliver, she burst out. But the boy walked on, didn't look back. He was even a little amused. And the next day, Oliver and Betty went for a walk in the village. If I ask you something now, will you not be offended and run away from me? I hope not, she answered him. If I asked you to date, would you agree? Oliver said uncertainly. I think we can try. Betty didn't refuse him because she had already realized once that she was really bored without this friend. Shall we go to the disco tonight? He asked her. No, Selena is there and I don't want to meet her. Betty shook her head. Come on, you're with me now. I won't let anyone hurt you, he told her. Let's just go for a walk or go somewhere else. We can go to my grandmother's. I have my own room there to sit, Betty suggested. Okay, I'll see you tonight, Oliver agreed. So they met at her house and then at his. And then the vacation was over and she had to go back to the city. Right, Oliver told her. You too? She was almost at the foot of the bus, but she got down, walked over to him, and kissed him on the cheek, and he held her close for a few seconds. Now Betty had no other thoughts, only of the young man. She dreamed of how things might be, what kind of husband he would be, what kind of children they would have, where they would live, and everything else. Slowly the girl studied until the summer vacation, and on the first day she began to ask her parents to go to the village. Wow, I never would have thought that our Betty would ask to go where she couldn't be dragged on a rope before, laughed her father. Of course, not that very day, But a little later they took again. New Year's Eve they celebrated together. In the summer, when Betty came to the village after graduation, they never parted at all, walking as if glued to each other. And in the fall, when school started, Betty asked her father to take her to the village. "What about your studies?" Her parents didn't understand. "Mom, Dad, what study? My beloved is going to serve. And you are talking about some study." She looked at them. Then the father understood everything. He made concessions and took his daughter to the village. Oliver left. Betty stayed behind. She came home, cried for a long time. Her mother soothed her, said that time would pass quickly. You just have to wait. And indeed, time passed quickly. The girl wrote letters every day. Of course, back received not so often. She thought that the guy there is just no time, but still there were letters. She studied, as if everything was fine. New Year's Eve passed, and at the end of January, when the family was sitting at the table and celebrating a holiday, Betty suddenly threw up. "What is it?" Her mother turned to her. "I don't know," she replied. "Are you sure you don't know?" The mother was shocked. "Yes, I might be pregnant, but it's not certain," Betty told her. "What do you mean it's not certain? Tomorrow morning you get ready and we're going to the doctor," her mother told her. No matter how much the girl cried, no matter what she told her mother, she didn't want to hear anything. Only abortion, nothing else. "Mom, how can you kill your own child?" Betty cried. "I don't know anything. You have your whole life ahead of you. If you don't study now, you'll ruin your young years. He'll come back. It's not clear whether he'll stay with you or not." I said abortion, so it will be abortion. She didn't want to hear any arguments. At first, Betty didn't want to write to Oliver about it, but then she decided that it wouldn't be fair on her part, and also that the guy would just support her. How painful and unpleasant it was. After that, the girl shoved herself away. She did not go anywhere, did not communicate with anyone, wrote letters in which she complained to Oliver about her fate and waited for him. Betty had graduated from college, and now she could go to work as an accountant. Oliver, though he hadn't studied anywhere, went to work at the factory. They promised him evening courses, which he was going to take. "Hello." A young girl entered the office, where almost all the women over 40 were sitting. "Oh, new girl, come in." They greeted her in a strange way. Betty started working in the finance department. At first, she didn't know or understand anything at all, but in time she began to get involved in the work. Many people reproached her, made remarks, but the boss, who was at that time, always called Betty to her office and told her not to pay attention to anyone. Everyone wants to pull the blanket over himself, and having done bad to his neighbor, thinks that he will do better only to himself, the woman often said. That's why Betty didn't pay attention to anyone. One day she came home from work and her husband was in the kitchen. "Oh, Oliver, hi. Why are you sitting here? Where are your parents?" She came in. "I want to talk to you," he told her. "Yes, I'm listening to you. Just let me put the kettle on." She quickly poured water, put it on the gas, and sat opposite. "We have already lived with you for 5 years, and still no children are not planned." "Answer me," he asked her. "Oliver, well, wait a bit. Maybe the climate isn't right, or maybe it's just a matter of time," she told him calmly. "What time?" He jumped up from the table. 5 years is not time," shouted the husband at his wife, as if someone evil had possessed him. "What are you so angry about?" She didn't understand. "And the fact that your mother could not forbid. Where would I go? Would have returned from the army, would have taken you and the child. You should not have done this abortion. Now because of him you cannot have children," shouted at his wife Oliver. Betty sat there crying. It was the first time she had seen her husband in such a state. "Calm down, please," she pleaded with him, but Oliver had no intention of doing so. Tonight he had gone out. Betty waited for him for a long time, but when it was well past midnight, she just went to bed. In the morning, her mom came in. "Are you asleep?" she asked her. "No," answered Betty and looked at her with eyes red with tears. "What happened at your place last night?" The woman was curious, for she and her father had heard the young ones fighting, so they did not leave the room. "I don't know what came over him." The girl shrugged. She really didn't know anything. "Where did he spend the night?" The mother wondered. "Mom, well, I don't know. He left and slammed the door. That's all. Nothing else," continued to cry Betty. "I see," left Mom to her room. Betty showed that the woman said it as if she understood everything. She started to get ready for work, and when she got there, she was met at the very door by Naomi. They were sitting in the same office, but since she was here waiting for her, she had something to say. Betty finally grabbed her hand by the woman's arm and took her aside a little. "What's the matter?" the girl asked her. "Quiet." She looked around to make sure no one was around. "Good," nodded Betty. "Could your husband be seeing the girl off this morning?" she asked her. "Walking her where?" Betty didn't understand, because he had to go to work today too. "I don't know, to see her off, not to see her off, but to go to work together, for example," Naomi asked. I don't know what to answer. Everything shook inside Betty. She was both nervous and afraid, all her feelings mixed up inside. "So are you going to remain silent?" the woman asked her. "What can I tell you if I really don't know?" Tears were coming to her eyes, and it seemed to Betty that she was about to cry. "So listen, I ran into Oliver today on my way to work. I couldn't have been mistaken, it was him, but there was a young woman next to him," Naomi began to say. "That's enough. I'd had enough of this." Betty turned around and walked towards the offices. "What an idiot," said her senior colleague after her. Today, Betty waited until the end of the working day. She rushed home, but her husband wasn't there yet. "What's wrong?" her mom asked her. "Today at work they told me that Oliver is cheating on me." She didn't hide anything from her mother. "Do you think it's true?" The woman was wary. "I don't know what to think. I just want to ask him. For as long as we've been together, there's never been any lying between us, no bad relationship. And I think that if I ask, he will definitely tell me," Betty said naively. Her mother only shook her head. Finally, Oliver returned. He saw that the whole family was gathered and they were sitting in the kitchen. He realized something had happened. "So tell me," he went in there. "Tell me one thing, is it true or not?" She raised her head. "Yes," he nodded, realizing what he was talking about. "Why?" It was a reasonable question from his wife. "Betty, I want children. Lust is pregnant. She will bear me a healthy child. I will have heirs. I will have something to live for. Not just like this," he answered her. "Ah, is that so?" Now Ariana rose from her seat. She realized in whose vegetable garden the stone flew. "Mom, sit down, please. Everything that has already happened, it will not return. So why waste nerves? If he has found another and she has fallen in love with him, and especially if she is about to give birth, or is it not so?" Look Betty at her husband again. "Don't start, please," he told her and went to pack his things. After that, it was a long divorce procedure. At work, Betty went to work as if she had been drowned in water. She didn't understand anything, couldn't do anything. It got to the point where her boss called her in one day. "Betty, do you realize what's going on? If you continue like this, we'll probably have to say goodbye to you," the woman told her. "No, it's all good now." BT promised her that she would do well from now on. Now that it had been a few years since she had been placed here, she was in a pretty good position, even though she had started out as a simple technician. Knock, 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 hello. A young man came into the office. "Hello," looked at him interested colleagues. "And I'm here to see you," the new guy said, John, and entered the office. Wow, what young people have already started to hire, began to judge among themselves senior colleagues. "Don't listen to them," said Betty. "All right, I'm here on assignment. My name is John. I hope we will work well together, and I will stay here for a long time," said the new employee. "Hi, John. My name is Betty Petrovna. I've been working here for more than 7 years, and if you have any questions, be sure to contact me. I will always help you," smiled Betty to him. She liked such young and active. "Thank you." He glanced at the women who were sitting and murmuring. From that moment on, Betty was like John's guardian angel. She helped him with everything, advised him on everything. If there was a wrong report or any flaws, she corrected everything and explained everything to the young man. "How can you do that?" He was always surprised by her. "It's okay. You'll work for another year, and you'll be able to do the same," she said calmly to him. "Why do you bother with him?" Her colleagues didn't understand her. "Well, why, I came here once just like you. You helped me. When you were just out of school, you probably had help too," the woman told them. John did his best. He obeyed all of Betty's instructions. He was praised by his superiors, and he was moving up the career ladder. "Mom, hi, I'm home." Betty came home from work. "Hi." There was a woman standing in the hallway. "What's wrong with you?" Betty didn't understand when she saw the look on the woman's face. "Oliver's dead," the woman told her. His wife had just had a baby. Betty was stunned at the door. "I don't know. A colleague at work today said he lost control of his car and hit an oncoming car," the mother said. "Do you need any help?" Betty was worried, even though they hadn't parted well, and it was all Oliver's fault. But now that he had a small child and needed a lot of things, she was willing to help in any way she could. No one called. No one said anything," Ariana said. "I'll call myself then." She opened the phone book, found the number, and dialed it. "Hello, this is Betty, Oliver's ex-wife." She spoke into the receiver. Then she was silent for a long time, listening to what she was going to say. I understand, only heard the mother, the words of her daughter. "Well, what did they tell you?" the woman asked. "That they don't want anything from me, and they won't take handouts," smiled Betty. "That's fine, I don't insist," she shrugged. Then Betty wanted to go to Oliver's funeral, but she hadn't decided to, because when they talked to his current wife, she'd felt a lot of negativity from the woman. "Not going?" her mother asked her. "I won't go," she shook her head. Betty continued to work. She raised the department because she was already the head of it, and continued to support John in everything. And he, thanks to Betty, was following in her footsteps. First, he became the lead specialist, then the head specialist, and soon she was prophesying that he'd move up to her position. "Oh, come on, Betty, you've got a lot of sitting around to do." He was uncomfortable with her talking about him like that. "No way," she waved her hand and laughed. It had been years since Oliver had left her, but she was still alone, because she knew she'd never find anyone like him anywhere else. "Betty, why don't we go to the village?" her father suggested it one evening. What would we do there? She didn't understand. She was already a little over 40. Her grandmother was long gone. So now, who is there? What will do? She did not even know. And what should we do there? We'll come, clean up everything, see what condition the house is in, fix it up, and maybe it will be our country dacha, her parents told her. "You know what? I probably agree. How long has it been since we've been there?" She looked at her mother. "Well, how long since my grandmother's funeral?" "It's been practically 9 years. Here, it's been 7 years since we've been there," Ariana squinted. "Well, tomorrow I'll ask if they'll give me a vacation, and we'll definitely go there with you," her daughter promised them. First thing in the morning, she didn't sit down at her desk to start doing her morning report, but went to her boss's office. "Yes, of course, Betty. Why else would you ask? Remember the last time you were on a full vacation, then you'd leave? They'd call you in for one thing, and you'd always respond, always show up. And now, if you need to go somewhere, please, no pity, write an application and go." Put a piece of paper in front of her boss. "Thank you very much," Betty answered her. She wrote the application, came home in the evening, told her parents that she was ready to go to the village. They packed everything they needed, set off. "Do you think nobody broke into the house?" the father asked the family. "Come on, there are neighbors there." The mother didn't think anyone would do such a thing. "Well, yes, I also think that the neighbors would have stopped these attempts," agreed with her husband. And there they were. Betty watched the whole thing. She'd seen it many times before, but it didn't seem the same. Like the fence was taller and the house was bigger, and there was a beautiful front garden, and now there were branches growing there. There are no young people walking the streets. They're all grown up. "Val, have you fallen asleep?" Her father turned to her. "Ah, no." Now she looked back at him. They all went into the house together and saw that indeed, almost the whole porch was rotten. In some places, even a foot was falling through. The doors needed to be replaced too. In the yard, everything is neglected. What to speak about the vegetable garden? So I suggest we have a cleanup day. We'll split up. Some of us will go to the vegetable garden. Some of us will do the house. Some of us will clean up inside the house. So who's in favor? Who's against? Dad's looking at everyone. "I'm in favor. There's nothing to do anyway," said Ariana. "I'm in too," said Betty, and they decided not to put it off. They poured water into buckets and armed themselves with rags, mops, and brooms. First, Ariana and her mother swept everything out of the house, dusted everywhere, washed and cleaned everything. Her father had to fix everything now, and then they could clean it up and rewash it. "Are you going to the garden now?" Ariana asked her daughter. Yes, she nodded. It was done quickly there too. Some of it they ripped out by hand, some they mowed, some they cut. By the end of the evening, all three of them were very tired, but when they saw what they had done in that time, they liked it all very much. Why wasn't this place like this before? Finally, Betty voiced her thoughts out loud. "It wasn't like this, it was like this. I was born and nothing has changed," her father told her. "It seems to me that everything is different. The house is different, the gate is different. The yard is different, the garden is different too." Betty curled her fingers. "Let's go to dinner. I've got a goose in the oven," Mom said. I hope the goose is still as good as it was." Betty remembered how her grandmother used to cook it. They sat down at the table, ate dinner, and started talking about who was staying, how much, and what they were going to do here. "So do you want to stay here for your whole vacation?" Betty's father asked. I wish she smiled because she realized how she had answered that question before and how she was talking about it now. "I don't mind at all, the fresh air, the forest, the river, it will all do you good," the man told her. She and her mother were going to stay here for 2 or 3 more days and then drive back. Now, when they helped her father make the porch the next day, it seemed as if there was no debris at all, no weeds, as if someone had left the house yesterday and they had arrived today. Mom was making dinner again, and Betty decided at that moment to go to the vegetable garden and dig up some soil, make some beds, and plant something so that the soil wouldn't go to waste. "Oh, I realize what's happening to our daughter," Ariana said out loud. "What's going on with her?" Her father didn't understand. "Well, first of all, she is over 40, and secondly, with age comes a craving for the land, and if before she did not even want to talk about it, but now look, she dug the ground herself." They stood near the gate to the vegetable garden and discussed it. "I can hear everything," Betty told them. "And we don't hide anything from you," laughed the parents. After that, as agreed, the parents stayed here for the next 2 days and then left. Betty had another month or so to go, and she wasn't going back to the city. She liked it here now. She dug in the vegetable garden, then she stoked the bathhouse, put a cot outside, and could lie down half the day, read a book, and sunbathe. One day she went to the river and saw that a building was being erected near the village council, all enclosed by a fence. It was unclear what was going to be there. "What is being built here?" she asked a woman who was passing by. "Yes, they decided to open a dairy farm. They will make cheese, cottage cheese, milk." She waved her hand. "Why so uncertain? Don't you believe in them?" Betty asked. "I don't even know." The woman shrugged her shoulders and walked past. Betty wondered. She turned toward the village hall, went inside. There were a lot of people there, so she didn't wait. She walked, went to the fence where the construction was going on, looked inside. There were a lot of workers there. Of course, Bee wasn't sure of that, but it seemed to her that they were all commuters. She saw one of the workers turn toward her. Betty immediately hid behind the fence and walked onto the river where she was going. There she walked on the water for a while. After spreading out a towel, laid down on the sand, but it was not as comfortable here as it was in her backyard. Then the woman made up her mind and walked back. When she passed by the construction site again her interest was greater than anything else, so she approached the gate again. Betty saw men on a fire in some kind of vat, boiling something. Now she couldn't resist going inside. "Hello, what are you building here?" she asked them, just as she had asked the woman. They repeated word for word what the woman had told them. "I see. But why don't people believe you?" She couldn't understand. "Well, this is their problem. Why don't they believe us? We will build it, we will leave, and other people will work." The workers answered her. "And what do you have here?" Betty nodded at a vat of some kind of balance sheet. One of the workers opened the lid and stirred the contents of the vat. "You can't eat this stuff. You can only feed it to pigs," she grumbled. Pigs, they give us cereals, bread, stew, canned fish. But where to cook?" "Only here," they answered. "Well, we'll think of something," said the woman, and with a confident gait went to the chairman. The place was still crowded, but Betty didn't linger. She walked straight to the door. Even though she'd heard shouts from behind her, she knocked anyway and opened the door. "I don't have time." He looked at her. "I'll just be a few minutes," said Beatty, and confidently closed the door and sat down in a chair. "Hello, who are you anyway?" the chairman asked her. "You may remember, I used to have a grandmother who used to live here," she told him, wearing her name. "Ah, Betty, wow. What a grown-up. She got so funny that she was so old and she was still Betty." "So Harry," she said, "I saw that you had some construction going on and I came to ask you about it." "Ask away," sighed the chairman, apparently fed up with the questions. "Have you seen what your workers eat?" she asked him. "I didn't think about this question. They don't complain. They keep silent, and I have a lot of work to do." He showed his hand above his head. "And let's organize a field kitchen, and at least we'll feed them normal lunches," the woman suggested. "And what would it take?" he asked her. "Nothing. Talk to the local women. If they agree, I am ready to help them in everything," the woman told him. "Okay, I'll tell them, and then it's up to you," the chairman replied, and considered the conversation over, watching as she left the office. The very next day, Harry did everything Betty had asked him to do, and today, they had a gathering at the club. Many women from the village had responded. They were now ready to do a good deed for the workers. Some cooked soup at home, others made the second course, and others baked flatbread. Beatty was not lagging behind either. She made cakes almost every day. The first time the workers received a home-cooked meal, they were overjoyed. So a week went by, and one day, Steve came up to Betty. They already knew each other. He smiled, took some pies from her, looked at them. "Are they good?" she asked him. "Very tasty. You have the most delicious pies in the world." He looked at her with black eyes. "I'm glad you like them," smiled back at him, and then she laughed. In the evening, she sat at home, waiting for no one, doing her usual chores. There was a knock on the window. She thought it was the local women, because they often dropped by to ask her for advice or to tell her what they were going to do tomorrow. Betty pulled back the curtain and was stunned. Outside the window stood Steve, smiling. She went out to him outside the gate, red as a cancer, because she liked the man. "Shall we go for a walk?" he asked her. "No, better let's sit at home." She didn't want any gossip around the village. He walked into her place. They sat down at the table. Betty had made tea, put out all the same cakes she had left at home. Now they sat and talked. Their meetings had become regular. Every evening Steve came to visit her. They chatted. They had so much in common. They seemed to understand each other half-heartedly. "Betty, you are extraordinary." Steve held her in his arms and tucked her hair behind her ear. Betty realized that now the construction would be over and they would all be out of here. She had prepared herself for this, realized he wouldn't stay with her, but she couldn't help it. She decided that as it was, so it would be. The vacation was ending in a week, and on the last day of vacation, Steve was at her place again. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she told him. "So that's it. That's the end of our meetings." He didn't believe her. "Why, it will not end. Just now I will come less often, only on weekends." She had already thought it over. "I will wait for you from Saturday to Saturday." He kissed her. The next day he was already at her place in the morning, seeing her off. They kissed goodbye and Betty left. Her life was more interesting now. All day long she was at work. John had already become her deputy. Many of the women in the department had retired. Betty couldn't get enough of this young man who had come here knowing nothing and was now showing such results. And on Friday night, she would take the last bus and go to the village to her lover. And then, just before New Year's Eve, he came to see her. Betty knew it all at once when she saw the way he looked at her. "I won't keep you," she answered him. "You see, I have a wife and children there. I can't stay." He took her face in his hands as always and kissed her, kissed her, kissed her. "Goodbye," she kissed him, and in the morning their brigade left. Betty went back to town. She missed her, but she didn't let those thoughts take over her completely. Once she went to work, she didn't feel right. All day long she felt nauseous and dizzy. The next day in the morning, she asked to go to the hospital. When the doctor told her she was expecting a baby, she almost fell out of her chair. Betty was walking home. She didn't understand why this was happening now, when it seemed too late to have children. "Mom, you have no idea what is happening to me now." Sat down on a chair and began to tell her mother and the woman waited. "What I found out today." She was both scared and funny at the same time, because it would seem that she and her mother are already two grown women and can talk as friends. But Betty sat there, blushing like a schoolgirl. Are you out of your mind? Think how old you are, soon 45, and you're talking about a pregnancy. The mother grabbed her head, stood up, and went to the kitchen. What's wrong? Her father asked her. No, Mickey. Can you imagine? She's pregnant, and she wants to give birth, the woman told him, and just didn't know what to do. She went to the sink, drank some water, and went back to her daughter to talk her out of this rash act. No, Mom, I already listened to you once, and I'm not doing it now. I'm old enough, but I'm going to have this baby, so I can have someone in my life, she told her. Oh, that's it. I'm not interfering. It's your problem, and solve it yourself, her mother told her, and went into the other room, and Betty had already thought it over. She was at work until she got her maternity leave, and then she went to her boss and told her that John knew how to do everything. And now he can easily take my place while I'm on maternity leave, Betty announced to the boss. Well, Betty, I have even more respect for you, the woman in charge told her. And now there was no doubt in the woman's mind. She knew for sure that after giving birth, she would go to live in the country. She would have her own house, fresh air, and she would live happily there. Strangely enough, despite her age, the pregnancy was very easy. The doctors were afraid too. If after 25 they called women old born at that time, then Betty, who was over 40, they did not bode well at all. Practically, the day she was due, a healthy baby boy, whom Betty named Austin, was born. Her mother and father, of course, came to her discharge because it was their grandson, and they were so excited about the event that they just cried when they picked up their daughter. Mommy, don't worry. I'm not gonna live with you. Dad, if it's not too much trouble for you with all your things, can you take us to the village? She asked him. Are you sure you can manage alone? Her father asked her. Of course I am. I am experienced, strong, smart, and nothing can stop me, she smiled. The very next day in the morning, the car was on its way towards the village, and from now on, Betty began to live alone in her grandmother's house. She also had the most wonderful person in the world by her side, her son Ostinka. The woman continued to take an active part in the life of the village. She could go wherever she needed to go with her son or alone, so in a short time she was accepted and loved by everyone there. When Austin was a year old, she and he traveled to the city to visit his grandparents. They went there once or twice a month, and now they were going too. As Betty entered the apartment, holding her son in her arms, she heard her mother sobbing. She went into the room where the woman was, saw her sitting on the couch, crying. She went up to her, hugged her, and asked her what was going on. Daddy is not well. He was taken to the hospital, and no one says anything good, the woman said through sobs. Mommy, don't get upset. Everything will be fine, her daughter told her. She left Austin with her grandmother and went to the hospital. There indeed, the doctor said that the man was not well, and whatever medicines they gave him, nothing helped him. Only 9 days passed and the father was gone. How could it be? Sobbed Ariana at the grave. She couldn't imagine life without Mickey. He was her support, her backbone, her strong shoulder. Mommy, you have to move on, Betty reassured her, even though she couldn't hold on. But she did hold on so her mother wouldn't see her tears. Yeah, the woman nodded, but she felt like she was in the wrong place. Mom, why don't you come to the village with me? Betty told her, I'm sure I won't bother you there. The woman realized that she didn't want to stay in the city either, because she had nothing to do here alone. Yes, what are you saying? What? To interfere? On the contrary, you will only help me, she told her. Together they packed all their things, went to the village, and now they lived here, in her grandmother's house. Ariana helped in everything, both in the household and with the upbringing of the child. But as soon as they thought of Mickey, they immediately became very sad. One evening, when Betty was returning from a meeting, she saw someone sitting on a bench near their gate. She was surprised, walked over, and froze in place. Steve was sitting there. What are you doing here? She didn't understand. She was so happy inside. Her heart was pounding. She didn't understand what was happening to her. I came to see you, he told her. What about your wife, your children? She sat down next to him. I told her everything. She understood, and I realized that I can't live without you. He pressed her against him. Okay, let's go. They went into the house. Mother was also shocked to have such guests. Betty had never told her anything much, and she didn't say anything now either. Steve began to live with the two women. He probably thought the baby might be his, but he never asked about it. "Look, Betty, let's enlarge your house," Steve said to her one day. "Could you do that?" She looked at him. "You bet your man's got the right hands," he told her. "Well, if you want to do it yourself, and you have the strength, please, we'll get the building materials. I'll help you. You can call one of the neighbors," Betty said. "I'm in no hurry, so I think I can do it all by myself," he promised her. "Steve, I'm so glad you've come." Betty looked at him often as she sat in the kitchen. Her mother was in the room with Austin at this time. On some level, she too was glad that a man had finally come to her daughter. But on the other hand, everyone realized that he had a family, and even if he said that his wife understood him, it was not certain that he had divorced her and would not leave again. But like last time, nobody thought about it or said it out loud. "Listen, the other night," Betty whispered in Steve's ear. "What?" He turned to her. "You won't believe this, but I think I'm expecting a baby again." She looked at him with frightened eyes. "What are you going to do?" He fell silent and waited for her answer. "I think I'm going to give birth." She didn't know how Steve would feel about what she was doing, but she believed that everything would be fine. And in the other case, well, she raised Austin on her own. She didn't ask anyone for anything. Everything was fine. And now that the boy's 2 years old, why not have another baby? "Darling, I love you so much." He kissed her face again. "You see, I've been with my husband for so many years, and I've never even had a hint that I was pregnant," Betty told him. "What are you saying?" He didn't finish speaking. "No, I don't want to say anything. I just love you too." She put her head on his shoulder, pressed her whole body against his, and closed her eyes. "Daughter, how are you doing?" Her mom asked her in the morning. "If I tell you, you'll be shocked again." Betty didn't look up at her. "Don't tell me you're pregnant again." Her mother sank down on her stool and clutched her heart. "Mom, what can you do? If God decided to give me children only at this age?" Betty put her hands on her stomach. "Daughter, what are you?" "Think about it. One child, okay, enough, but where to two?" She did not understand. "Mom, I've made up my mind. We talked to Steve and decided that I'm going to have the baby," she told her. "Oh, that's it. Dismiss me. I'm not a counselor at all. I don't know anything. I won't promise or say anything," and so on. The woman stood up. She went to the sink, washed her face, and went to her grandson's room. Betty was strong. She didn't rely on anyone. She knew she could handle everything on her own. And now that she was pregnant again, everything was just fine. She and Steve went everywhere together, did everything together. He'd started doing things around the house as promised. He was really getting a lot done, but Betty was also thinking about the fact that she would soon be out of one maternity leave and would start a second one. There was going to have to be some warning at work about that. She looked at Steve, not knowing what to do. "What if you just call?" Steve asked her. "Do you think a phone call would be enough?" She didn't believe it. "Well, it's worth a try," he shrugged. So Betty went to the village council. From the chairman's office, she called her boss, told her how and what. "Come on, there you have the difference between it is only a few months. I think you should not go out. Write an application for vacation and rest further," the woman told her. "Okay, thank you. I'll rest further." She emphasized the word rest. But still, Betty was not going to give birth in the village. She went to the city with her mother by her side. And again, the same hospital, the same maternity ward. Now the doctors were also shocked that Betty had been seen at some village health center. The gynecologist didn't want to see her at all because he was afraid that if something went wrong, it would be his fault. So Betty had to sign some papers. And there she lay, happy because she had her little daughter Elizabeth on her chest. She was lying there and grunting so sweetly that her mom just smiled, even though it hurt so much. "Well, home?" she said to her daughter as she swaddled her up. Mom came to the discharge with Austin. Steve hadn't come from the village, but they hadn't arranged it. Betty thought she would stay at her mother's for a couple of days and then go back to the village. Betty was old, but she didn't feel old at all. It seemed to her that she was still a 20-year-old girl who seduced men, gave birth to children. And now she would start building a house and everything else. And it made her feel so light and bright, that she didn't think about anything else but that. "Steve, I'm so happy with you," she said to her man. "And you know how you motivate me. I'd do anything for you," he told her. By then, Steve was still feeding her with promises that he would get a job in the village council, in the fields or wherever. But as long as he made her a house, could watch the kids, she didn't say anything. But one day something happened that Betty thought about sometimes, but for some reason she had given up waiting for that moment. She was very unhappy when it happened. In the evening, there was a knock at the window. It was very late, so Betty looked at Steve and didn't realize who it was. "Maybe I'll go out," he told her. And when the front doors opened about 5 minutes later, Betty just grinned. Steve's wife was standing on the doorstep. I guess if she had small children, she would have come with them. "So how's it going with your estranged husband?" the woman asked her. "Fine," Betty answered her, "except I didn't know he was still your husband. So you should know that the children are waiting for him at home, so I had to step on my pride and come to you." The woman looked at her. There was nothing left to do. It was getting very late, so Betty put everyone at the table, gave them tea, and fed them dinner. She couldn't just throw that woman out on the street. Maybe she could, but the next day there would be such gossip all over the village that she'd have to leave. Everyone ate in silence. Then Betty made up a bed for Steve and his wife in the room where her mother used to live, and laid down in her own room with the children. In the morning, as they were leaving the house, Steve turned his head and with one lip said to her, "I'm sorry," and Betty waved him off. "Goodbye," she said, turned around, and walked into the yard, knowing that she would never accept this man again, and she would never believe him. When the doors slammed behind her, she sat down on a bench and just burst into tears. For almost 2 years they had lived here. Why hadn't his wife come sooner? Why hadn't he told her anything? Why hadn't he been able to divorce her in that time? But all these questions were unanswered. By now, Austin was in kindergarten. Elizabeth was still in her mother's arms, but the woman realized that it was necessary to get out of maternity leave, to go to work to earn money. Betty gathered the children, put her things together herself, decided that she would get herself together, and she would definitely do everything. She arrived in town and went straight to work to see what was up and running. "Hello, everyone." She entered the office. "Betty Petrovna." John stood up to meet her. He had indeed taken her place, and the woman was glad for the young man. "Well, how is everything here?" she asked, and began to look around. "Yes, everything is normal. We sit, we work." John waved his hands. "Okay, I'll go to the boss." The woman winked at him. When she entered the office, she was also welcome there, but no one was in a hurry to accept a woman from maternity leave. "But what about it? I have 2 children. I have to raise them," could not understand Betty. "You see, Betty, while there is time, you can sit still. I just do not want to fire a person, and you tomorrow will go on sick leave." Did not look in her eyes, boss. "So I have a mom," waved her hands. "No, we have to wait," shook the woman behind the desk from side to side. Betty headed home. She didn't understand how things could have gotten this way. When she entered the apartment, she immediately sensed something wrong. Elizabeth was screaming so much that her mother's heart almost burst with excitement. She ran into the room and saw that the woman was lying on the sofa. She looked with her eyes, they moved, and that was it. "Mommy," fell to her knees in front of her, Betty. She just mumbled back. "What the hell is this?" Betty went to the phone and dialed the ambulance. The paramedics arrived and took Ariana to the hospital. Betty sat down on the couch. She covered her eyes with her hands and cried. Now it seemed to her that everything was against her. Every day now, she and her children were in the hospital. How hard it was, no one can understand her, but the woman braced herself. Sometimes she thought that she had decided everything in her life, and now she had to do everything on her own. "Betty," someone shoved her in the shoulder. The nurses at the hospital had taken pity on the woman, and now she and the children were in the same room as Ariana, and they were sleeping there. "What?" She opened her eyes and immediately realized everything on the medic's face. "Your mom," he looked away. "No," the woman said quietly, so as not to frighten the children. And then there was the funeral. Betty did everything right. She sat with the children in the empty apartment, wondering what she should do now. "I can do anything," she said to herself, got up, and began to pack things that now simply will not be needed by anyone. Already a week later, BT, along with the children, were on their way to the village. The woman firmly decided that she would not live in the city. At first, she even began to think about selling the housing in the city to invest in a house. But then she changed her mind because her children will come here when they grow up. They will have a place to live. Here we are, she said to Austin and Elizabeth when they were back where their souls felt good. Her son had gone back to kindergarten, and her mother had put Lisa in after him. Now, she was determined to get the house up to code. Steve had organized everything so well here. He added a few rooms, also made a second floor, but everything was in the rough, so to speak. The woman bought paints, brushes, oilcloth, flooring, began to finish everything. In the village, the locals respected her. They remembered how she had organized food for the workers who were building the dairy farm. BT, hello. She heard someone shouting at her from outside the fence. She looked out the window and was surprised to see Selena standing there, the same one she had feuded with as a child. Hello, what do you want? The woman came outside. She hadn't seen Svetlana since she first came here, and she was living here now. Here, back in her native land, Selena waved her hands. What do you want from me? For a moment, Betty returned to her childhood when she didn't want to leave the house because she was afraid of this company. I decided to head one of the departments of the farm, but when I got there, I realized that there was no way we could do without an accountant, and then the locals told me about you, looked at her guest. You're offering me a job. Betty was surprised. Yes, you heard me right. Selena smiled. It was obvious that she was being kind. Okay, I accept. Not even a moment's hesitation from Betty. Great, I'll see you tomorrow morning with the paperwork. Selena nodded her head slightly. They said their goodbyes and both went off to continue their business. It was flattering to be accepted in this village. Betty began to pick out the clothes she would wear to go to her job tomorrow. In the evening, she picked up the children from the garden. They sat down to dinner. It seemed life was starting to get better. Now Betty was working. She received a good salary, was on good account with the bosses. The woman created a collective in the club. They sang songs, performed at concerts, and in their spare time, they'd do crafts. Austin, come here, called the mother of her son. Today, he was going to the first grade. It was necessary to check if everything was good in his outfit. Mom, where are the flowers? He looked at her. Now everything will be. The knife was already lying on the bench, so that when leaving, the mother cut flowers in the vegetable garden. Elizabeth was running around. She too was in a beautiful dress. Well, and you have already grown up, stood the mother on the ruler, eyes tearful. Time flew very fast, and now Elizabeth became a first grader. Austin walked with importance. He thought he was all grown up. Betty finished the house. Now it was just candy. It was one of the biggest and most beautiful in the village. Mom, let me get some water, Austin said. Betty looked at him and couldn't believe that this was really her boy, who not long ago was lying in his crib. Sure enough, she was bringing him a couple buckets. Betty was not the last person in the village. She loved to invite guests to her house. On this day, the woman cooked all day, and in the evening there were fun gatherings. Mom, can you teach me how to make pancake batter? Elizabeth often came to her. Of course, she looked at her daughter. They always did everything together. Betty would never have thought that those whom she gave birth to, raised and cared for, would ever do bad things to her. At some point, the woman decided that it was time to get some animals. And why? The yard is big. There is strength. Guys, come here, she called the kids. Austin was already in the 8th grade, Elizabeth a little younger. Why do you need it? The boy grumbled. He knew that they would have to do all this too. Why? Need of their own eggs. Betty looked at them. I don't know, Austin shrugged and looked at his sister. Okay, let's just give it a try, the woman asked them. It's up to you, you'll do most of the work anyway. The son didn't want to do anything at all. Lately, he'd been at the machine and tractor shop. The men there had taken him in and were teaching him all sorts of tricks. Austin wanted to go to the city after high school, go to college there, learn to be a motor mechanic, and come back here. He didn't care about anything else. All right, it was decided. The mother got up from the couch. She was confident in her abilities, so the next weekend, they all went to the market together. "Look what," said their daughter and pointed her finger at the boxes in which there were different animals. "Well, Elizabeth, choose." They stood near the boxes with chickens. They decided to start with the birds. If they succeeded with this one, then maybe they would buy some more. The family arrived home, at which point Betty decided that she had had enough. She didn't want to work anymore. So the next day she wrote an application. Now she was only occupied with the household, children, vegetable garden. "Mom, well, what if I go to the city? I will live there in the apartment of grandmother," Austin asked her. Of course, if you can manage, the mother was not sorry as long as everything was good. "You know me," he assured her. As Austin was graduating from high school, his mother and Elizabeth stood looking at their son and brother and were proud of him. Now he was leaving them for the city, but he promised to come visit and help. "Soon I'll go to school too," Elizabeth told Austin as she hugged him at the station. "Don't hurry, life is fleeting," her mother told her quietly. Now they were alone in the house. "Where are these rooms going?" Betty often asked. Before, everything had seemed so nice to her, but now she no longer had the energy to clean everywhere. "Mama, let me help," Elizabeth said, and Betty knew that in the evening she would have to go to the disco again. "All right," she agreed with her daughter, and so they lived to see Elizabeth's graduation. She didn't go to high school either. After ninth grade, she decided to go to Austin's place in the city. Leaving Mom all alone, Betty said sadly, "Mom, don't be like that." Her daughter looked at her. "No, I'm just saying," she wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. It seemed to Betty that time had passed so quickly that she hadn't noticed anything at all. Only yesterday she had been a young woman full of vigor, and now, standing here at the station, she felt like a wreck. Betty returned home, realizing that now she was here in the house all alone. One day she was walking down the street and heard a cat meowing somewhere. She found it, picked it up, brought it home, and then another and another. Now the woman had an outlet. The children were in no hurry to go to the village to visit her, even though they had promised. "Betty, are you home?" She heard her outside the gate. She looked out of the window and smiled. There stood her friends with whom she had sung in the choir together. She let them all go home, and they began to sit around, but that didn't happen very often. Austin and Elizabeth lived in the city in her grandparents' apartment. At first, while they were studying, everything was fine and friendly. But the moment Austin brought home a girl for the first time, the quarrels between brother and sister began. "Why do you always stay home?" Austin didn't understand her. "Unlike you, I'm studying," his sister told him. "What's there to study for?" He didn't understand. He and his new girlfriend needed privacy, but they couldn't afford it. And then Elizabeth met a young man, and so the four of them began to live together. "Why, do not you have your own place?" Often asked Elizabeth's suitor Austin. "He lives with his mother, and I do not want to go there," Elizabeth parried. Speaking of Mom, Austin looked at her. "Maybe we should go and visit her. It's been a year since we've been there." "Yes, I don't mind, and we can introduce our other halves to her," Elizabeth said. Such friendly conversations were very rare. No one was against the trip to the village, so on the weekend, all gathered and headed towards the village. Betty heard voices in the yard, noises. She didn't realize who it could be, but when she came out into the yard, she smiled and couldn't hide her joy that her children had come to visit her. She hugged everyone and stopped her attention on a young man and a girl who were unfamiliar to her. The guests entered the house and sat down at the table. The mother immediately began to do something. She took out some treats, pies, put tea. "Mom, meet Mila," Austin said, and showed her his fiancée. "And this is Mickey," Elizabeth pointed to her fiancé. "Nice to meet you, and me, Betty," she smiled back at them. Betty would never advise either son or daughter on who to choose as a life partner, because she had listened to her mother and it had all fallen apart. And now she was ready to accept the one they would love. After sitting at the table, Austin got up and started walking around the house. Of course, he remembered what and where he was, but now he was looking not with the eyes of a child, but an adult. "Mom, what if we renovate the place?" He looked back at the woman. "What do you want to redecorate?" She was surprised. "Well, I don't know. There's a lot of things to redecorate here." The kid walked around looking. "If you want to do it, she didn't mind." After that, the kids stayed a couple more days and went back to the city. Their life there continued. Now they did not spoil their mother with attention. They came to see her once a month or even once every 2 months. They were having more and more scandals in the apartment. "Austin, are you going to propose to me?" Mila told him when they had been dating for 5 years. "Look, I need to get on my feet first. Get a place to live," he told her. "So let's exchange the apartment. What's the problem?" She didn't understand. Elizabeth and Mickey didn't formalize their relationship either. Brother and sister practically didn't communicate because lately they were fighting over square meters. Once Mila was so offended by her fiancé that she packed her things and just left. Austin watched her and couldn't believe it would ever happen. He left too. He sat at the bar all night tonight, feeling sick. But when he got home, he found his sister sitting in the kitchen crying. "What are you doing?" he asked her. "Did you know?" Elizabeth turned to him. "About what?" Austin didn't understand much at the moment because the drinks at the bar were getting to him. "Mickey and Mila." Elizabeth stopped talking. "What?" Austin didn't understand her. They were now sitting in the kitchen and both of them couldn't understand how they hadn't noticed that their other halves had probably been together for a long time. "Elizabeth, why don't we exchange the apartment?" Austin asked her. "Listen, maybe we'll sell the house in the village and buy an apartment in the city." His sister looked at him. "And where would mother go?" Austin realized that the woman was already old and she would have to live with someone else. "Maybe we'll think of something," the girl said. She realized that it was a cunning plan, but at the same moment she realized that it was really a way out of the situation. The next day she and Austin went to her mother's village, first to calm down from what had happened the day before, and then to talk about her bad plan. In the morning, Austin scouted out how much his mother's house might be worth. It turned out to be good money. And now, he didn't think about anything else. Not his conscience, not his mother, not his sister. He had to come up with a good plan. As they drove to the village, he was silent the whole way. "Children," mother was doing something in the yard, and when they entered the gate, she couldn't believe it was really them. "Hi, Mom." They all went into the house. They were doing something, helping their mother. She was even surprised that it had been so many days and they were still not back in town. "Mom, do you remember when we went mushroom picking as kids?" Austin asked her. "Of course I remember. How could I forget that?" She smiled back at him. "Maybe we can go now too." He looked at his sister and winked at her. Elizabeth understood everything. "Yes, let's go, only we have to go in the morning. So let's wait until tomorrow and go," Betty told them. "Let's go right now." Austin looked at his watch. It was 10 in the morning. "Okay, if you want, we can go right now," the woman agreed. They gathered some provisions. Elizabeth was in the kitchen making sandwiches and tea. Austin was packing baskets. Not half an hour later, they were ready to move out into the woods. "Why don't we take my father's old car?" Austin asked the woman. "It's probably not running, just scrap metal." The mother waved her hand and smiled. "And the motorcycle?" Austin asked her. "Well, a motorcycle might still be possible," his mother doubted, but they decided to give it a try. When they loaded up and drove off, no one was exactly thinking anything yet. Austin and Elizabeth hadn't agreed on anything. They had talked about it a bit on the road, but it was all at random. Now they came to the deepest part of the woods, stopping. "Oh, Austin, why did you drive us so far?" The woman did not understand. "Mom, but no one walks here, and definitely there are mushrooms, berries." He looked around. They began to walk through the forest, where they collected something, and when several hours passed, they came to a clearing. Elizabeth spread a blanket on the ground, sat down on it, and took out a thermos of tea. Austin and Betty sat down next to her. Elizabeth looked at her brother, poured the tea into a mug, and handed it to her mother. "What is that tea that tastes so strange?" Betty asked. It wasn't long before her eyes blurred, and then it was just darkness. The woman woke up to the fact that she was very cold. She opened her eyes and realized she was lying in the same forest on a blanket. "Austin, Elizabeth," she shouted, but no one answered her. Betty tried to get up, but she couldn't. She leaned back on the plaid, wrapped herself in the other end. Her teeth chattered from the cold in a way that seemed to echo throughout the forest. Betty didn't understand a thing. How could the children have left her here? What if something had happened to them? But now her mind was so clouded that she didn't want to think about anything. She tried to get to her feet. There was a large stick lying nearby. She picked it up, covered herself with a plaid, leaned on the stick, and walked. It wasn't clear where she was going. There was such an impenetrable darkness around that it seemed to Betty that she was blind. At first, she walked by feel through the trees, but then she decided that it was necessary to get to the morning, and then she might find a path to the village. The woman wrapped herself in the plaid, tucked her legs under her, sat under one of the trees, her head still spinning. She shook it off, exhaled. The hours seemed to drag on for a very long time. And then it began to get lighter and lighter over the forest. Well, thank God, exhaled Betty, for in an hour it was almost light. She realized that it was early morning, so she had to get out. First she stood up, feeling that she had strength in her. Leaning on a stick, she walked to one side. Somehow she was sure that's where they had come from. She walked through the forest, shouting, thinking that maybe some foresters or mushroom hunters would be here, but no one answered her. When the weeds appeared ahead, Betty realized she was going the wrong way. The sun was burning so hot that even the branches of the big trees did not help to hide from it. She was thirsty, but she had no water with her. The woman sank to the ground. She covered her face with her hands and cried. She smirked to herself now. It might not have been true, but she realized that the children had done it on purpose. They were fed up with her. The old woman, what to do with her, where to put her? And they're young. They have to live. I wish the wolves would come and eat me here, she said aloud. And then Betty noticed a fungus, and at that moment she remembered Oliver. How he had led her through this forest, how he had shown her and told her where north was, where south was, what to eat, how to drink. At that moment, it was as if there had been a surge of strength. Betty stirred. She got down on her knees, crawled up to the tree, and began to look at where the moss was growing. When she had identified everything, then began to look for the berries. She remembered that they grew on the south side, and when she found the clearing, the morning dew that was still on the leaves refreshed her at least a little. After she had eaten some berries and licked the dew off the leaves, she simply fell on her back between the small bushes and laughed out loud. And yet she didn't want to listen to him then. She was bored with the stories. If only she'd known she could use it someday. So what else did Oliver say? Oh, how to sleep on the cold ground, which requires matches, and I don't have any, so that's out, she reasoned aloud. At first, Betty decided that she was not going anywhere, that she would stay where she was. What if she was wrong, and the kids hadn't left her here on purpose? They'll start looking for her, and she'll leave the place. They won't find her at all. But then the woman decided that she couldn't stay where she was, so she went north. She determined the direction by the trees, followed the road where she saw good branches, gathered brushwood, because when darkness fell, she spread thin sticks on the ground like a mat, laid down on them, and covered herself with a plaid, which she also dragged with her. She walked for days, gathering dew in the morning, eating berries and mushrooms, thanking Oliver for telling her which were edible, even raw. One day she came across a brook from which she drank. Betty sat by that stream for a long time, wondering where it could flow from. She didn't realize how many days she had been here, but at some point she realized that she couldn't walk anymore. Her feet were tarred with blood. She still gathered some brushwood, made a bed under a tree, and lay down. At some point she heard a noise in the distance, like something being said. What if it was an animal, or maybe it was just her imagination? She peeked out from behind a tree, and then a gunshot rang out. Betty's pupils dilated, and she sat there dead and alive. "Help!" she shouted, because she was afraid that she might be mistaken for a wounded animal, and now she would be killed. "Ow, I'm here! Help!" she shouted again. Then she heard the rustling of pine needles under her boots. Someone was approaching her. And when the man leaned over her and she looked up at him, she was breathless. "John? John, is that you?" She started to hug him. "Betty," he wondered, "what are you doing here? Please help me. I don't know by what miracle you are here, but I need to go to the village," she told him and cried. The three men quickly took the woman under their arms. They brought her to the car, sat her down. Everyone looked at her and did not understand how such an old woman could be in the middle of the forest. "John, you tell me, how did you get here?" Betty said through her tears. "You know, thanks to you, I have achieved a lot in my life. I filled your position for many years, Then I became a supervisor, and then I was elected mayor. And now this weekend, we decided to go hunting with some friends, he told her. What weekend? The woman looked up at him. Why? He looked at her in the rearview mirror. We went into the woods on Saturday, Betty reflected. So, with no food and no water, you spent a week in the deep woods? John asked her. I guess so, she smirked. I think the children decided to get rid of me and took me here, knowing I couldn't get out. The woman said it all very sadly. When the car pulled up to the house, Elizabeth and Austin ran to the window. They didn't realize who it could be. When first a man came out of there and then a woman was led out under their arms, they just couldn't believe it. Hello. John entered the house. He was already a very personable man, and now Elizabeth and Austin stood under his gaze and lowered their eyes. How could you do this? Was there really no other way out? He told them. The children simply remained silent. The mother was carried into the room, laid on the bed. It's done, said the mayor's friends. Be warned, I will personally watch you. If a single hair falls from your mother's head, you will regret it. He threatened Austin and Elizabeth. When the man left the house and left, the children did not stay here either. They were ashamed. They quickly packed their things and retreated. A week later, John arrived. He said that Betty was allotted a small house. If she agreed, they were ready to move her right away. Oh, I don't need anything anymore, she said, and then asked John to go to her children and tell them she forgave them. By evening, Austin and Elizabeth were at their mother's house. They went into the house and approached Mother, who was sitting in the kitchen at the table. Both got down on their knees and cried, Mommy, please forgive us for what we have done. You raised us, brought us up, and you and I are so. They raised their eyes to her. You are the most valuable thing that I have in my life, and I do not hold a grudge against you. She hugged them and pressed them to her knees. After that, everyone sat down at the table, but son and daughter were still uneasy that they could have done such a thing. Mom, I'll do anything to make sure you have a good life, Austin said. And so will I, Elizabeth put in her word. You know, guys, God gave you to me late, but I have never regretted that you were born. You are my happiness, the light in the window. Tell me, I'll take everything I need and I'll go to the forest myself just to make you feel good, cried Betty. No, what are you saying? The children rushed to her at that moment, imagining what could happen if she did not return from the forest. Did you realize that all good deeds in life come back? The woman looked at the children. You mean John? Austin guessed. Yes, nodded the mother. Does it turn out that the evil ones will return too? The sister looked up at her brother. Don't need to think about it. Everything will be fine. They sat in the kitchen and hugged.